Hello, everybody. We have some major breaking news. We are changing our entire show, and we're putting this up at the top. We have the breaking news that happened literally as we were recording. Vice President Kamala Harris has chosen Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota as her vice presidential pick for the Democratic nomination. So I'm sure that Crystal's doing some backflips at home, and I'm sure she wishes that she was here on the show with us. So Ryan, we got this breaking news. Governor Walz really surged in the last 48 hours or so in the betting markets. There was a lot of speculation. I personally thought it was going to be Governor Josh Shapiro just because of the electoral calculus. But Tim Walz here is a popular Minnesota governor. Minnesota in the Midwest, he coined the whole weird attack on Republicans. He was the choice of organized labor. There were also some late-breaking problems, it seems, with Governor Josh Shapiro and some of the baggage that he may bring to the tickets. So what do you make of the pick right now? I know we've only had minutes to process it.
It's stunning in the sense that it's something that makes me happy. Yeah. And I'm not used to that when it comes to Democratic Party politics.
Okay.
Tim Walz always represented a rural district in Minnesota that became increasingly suburban over the time that he represented it.
Right.
But by 2016, it swung like 15, 20 points for Trump, and he held it, rather comfortably. Now, not totally comfortably, but comfortably for a Democrat. And he did not do so by tacking right, like the classic Democratic blue dog of old. He did it by championing kind of populist values. Like his first ad for Congress was talking about how due to his military service, he lost a lot of his hearing. He was able to get medical treatment that was able to restore his hearing. And one morning he woke up and he asked his wife, "What is that sound?" And he said, "That's my daughter. That's your daughter laughing."
Wow, interesting.
And he said she'd been waking up giggling every morning, but he had not been able to hear her. And he finishes the ad by saying, like, every father should be able to hear their child's laugh in the morning. Everyone should have that kind of access to health care. And so that's the kind of populism that pushes forward a kind of leftist agenda that people have been like crying out for, that's arguing like that's why Bernie Sanders was able to appeal so well to people who are independents. And so to have somebody like Walz who's able to win these rural districts with that populist message, and rather than sounding weird, like a social justice warrior kind of Democrat of the 2010s, to call out Republicans as being the weird ones, to kind of center his version of populist lefty politics, and to have the entire Democratic Party kind of think that is electorally beneficial, suggests something interesting going on with the party.
Well, let's think then a little bit about how this was Josh Shapiro's to lose. Can we put B2, please, up on the screen? This was former Speaker Nancy Pelosi yesterday, was on CNN, asked about the problems with Governor Josh Shapiro, and they said, does this stem from anti-Semitism? She says, I think it's probably more about policy, but the decision will be made by our candidate for POTUS. I think that it would be better if they weighed in more privately. So clearly she's throwing her weight behind Tim Walz. Reportedly, we had brought that to everybody on our show on Monday. Tim Walz, a former House colleague.
He helped make her speaker by winning a 2006 race. Yeah.
Helped make her Speaker of the House. But I'm also just thinking a little bit look, I mean, Shapiro was probably the most obvious pick. So then in a certain sense, it's his to lose. I think that the Israel stuff obviously contributed to the decision, perhaps in terms of it might split the coalition. But let's not forget that organized labor played a role here, including here with Nancy Pelosi's pick, right? So, and her support, not only personally, you had the charter school issue, which Crystal had talked about here previously. So give us a sense of, like why Kamala might have picked Tim Walz over a governor, Josh Shapiro, who is, let's be honest, I mean, he's the literally popular governor of the must-win tipping point state. I mean, it takes some guts to pick somebody else in that decision.
Extremely talented politician too.
Yes.
Like very well liked in Pennsylvania. And there was some analysis that said that he might pick up 0.4% of the vote, like add 0.4% to Democrats' totals in Pennsylvania, which is in a razor thin margin, an absolutely huge amount. Yes, the charter school thing doesn't make him a huge fan doesn't make the teachers unions huge fans of him. I think it was more this murder-suicide thing that came out towards the very end.
So what's going on with that?
When he was Attorney General, it's very, very complicated. People can go read it, but it's now in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court just now. Coincidentally, brutal timing for Shapiro. But basically, there was somebody died, a woman who, and he knew the family, he knew the people involved. His office ruled it a suicide for years, with the family saying, no, like, we believe that this is a homicide, and there are people. I haven't looked at the details close enough to be an expert on this. People say that, like, some of the wounds that she had were in the back of her head after she died. So it's like, how can that possibly be a suicide? But getting too deep into these details is you're gonna go down a rabbit hole. But the point is, I don't think the Harris campaign wants to go down that rabbit hole because some of the family of the suspect donated money to Shapiro, and Shapiro had ties to them. And, but then his defenders were saying, well, this is also anti-Semitism because they all went to the same Hebrew school. So you're saying that therefore anybody who went to this school can't be governor. It's like, he later recused himself. He probably should have done that at the very beginning. You can tell from just talking about it, it's a giant mess.
Yeah, it's a mess.
And so if you have this giant mess, like, ugh, is this really what we want to spend our time talking about for the next
I know these things
months?
sound stupid. Remember, guys, we've only got 90-some days to the election. You don't want to waste a single day on something dumb. When we think,
also, Minnesota was not a layup for Democrats.
Yes and no, but I mean, Kamala was up by 6, very lately. And yes, I think I think you're right. I mean, one of the enduring things over all of this is that a friend of mine this weekend, I was talking with him, and he's like, Biden dropping out really makes me think like Trump was actually going to win New Mexico. Like, it wasn't some right-wing fever dream. He's like, I think he might actually have won like New Mexico and Virginia.
I think he'd won
and
Minnesota,
right, which he barely lost in 2016. When we think here too, let's go first of all. So let's think about the electoral map. I also thought, I saw some very interesting analysis, which is that my theory of the election, the whole Pennsylvania 270 plus 1 electoral vote, may be incorrect in that Kamala, by reconsolidating the Democratic coalition, picking somebody like a Tim Walz who gets suburban people, I think, very excited. I think Democrats really like the idea of the straight talking dad, and he's one of the just plain weird. That's all they are. Now, I'll save, I'm sure we'll have many fights over weirdness and all of that in the coming months, but just thinking about the electoral, like who he excites. And I think there is like if we think the swing coalition here, Kamala needs to win white men back at the same rate that Biden won in 2020. That's really why Joe Biden won the race. So you pick like the quintessential white dude from the Midwest, high school football coach and all of that, the straight talker. He's got a couple pounds on him, I guess, which is as American as can be. And you make him, like the number 2 on the ticket. Well, now we're not necessarily just playing the Midwest game and just assuming that the Sun Belt is gone. It could be that those same suburban white people who delivered Georgia and Arizona to Joe Biden in 2020, well, maybe they're back in play. So Kamala may actually have a path to the White House where perhaps she could lose a Wisconsin, a Pennsylvania, or a Michigan. But if you pick up Georgia, you can make up enough electoral votes. You can hold down the fort in Nevada, New Hampshire, places like that, and you could still get there, to 270. I think it's 279 is something like that. So I was playing a little bit with 271, and that kind of challenged my thinking a little bit. In the contra to the Josh Shapiro case, if her internal polls show a tight race in the Midwest, but a lot more fluidity in the Sun Belt, well, the Sun Belt then comes back into play. I had not assumed that, but it's possible that that's what her thinking was in her path to 270 here, where Tim Walz, get those suburban people, keep them in the coalition. These are these people are rich, they have a lot of money, they love to vote, and they're obsessed with abortion. So excite them, turn out the vote, demoralize already Republicans, kind of in a little bit of a mess here. They're not really sure what to do, and they feel like they're on their back foot. They were so excited because they thought they were the only ones who were pumped up for the race. And now they're a little bit, trying to figure out their strategy in running here.
And I think two things on that. One is that in the Sun Belt and in Georgia, a lot of those people are actually from like Pennsylvania and the Midwest, and New England and elsewhere.
Yeah, that's true. Actually,
like they literally are from there. And then the second related point, there are no regions anymore.
Yes, everything is national. Yeah,
like this idea that, and this was the check that the framers thought would keep partisan intrigue at a minimum, because the different regions had such significant interests that they would butt heads with each other. New England versus the middle South and the bottom South, it's deep South, etc. That's gone. We're like a monoculture. You drive around this country, you go anywhere in this country, we're the same place, whether it's Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, Pennsylvania. I mean, there's some moderate differences here. And also people are moving around constantly all the time. And if you have a person who just, it seems like an authentic individual like Walz, then he's going to play, and I think your point is exactly right, in Georgia and in Arizona, not as well as he plays in Minnesota because people know him extremely well there, but he's going to play just fine. The joke that I've seen from kind of centrist Democrats is that they've been saying like, hey, you left-wing Democrats out there who've been pushing for Tim Walz, do you know that he called the National Guard out during the George Floyd riots? Don't you want to criticize him for that for the next 3 months? Like they think if people like me on the left just beat him up for being too tough on the riots in 2020, then that will make him look better and tougher on crime.
I'm glad you brought that up, though, because I've actually seen the opposite, which is apparently the Minnesota Senate heavily criticized Tim Walz for his bad handling of the riots.
That's why they want the left to criticize him for being too strong.
Okay, so, but anyway.
And he apologized. He said, I failed. How I handle
that's what I think is interesting, is now I think there will be a little bit. So I've seen the right-wing reaction that I've seen right now is that, okay, let's go. Let's play, let's play. Let's talk about BLM. Let's talk about the bail fund with Kamala. And that is kind of that is probably one of the more potent attacks. Now, in general, the issue is, guys, it was 4 years ago. Now, look, I'd love to relitigate BLM, but it's not gonna happen. I mean, most people have moved on.
I think you're right. I think people agree with them. Agree with Republicans on this point, but also don't care and want to move past it.
It's possible. So for example, I'll give people a taste of the right-wing reaction here. I've got Charlie Kirk. He says, welcome to the race, Tim Walz. Let's make sure America knows who you are. You helped ignite the George Floyd riots, the worst the country's seen in decades. While Minneapolis burned, you stalled on deploying the National Guard. You let your daughter leak the Guard's deployment plans online so that rioters would know they had to loot the city. Minneapolis is a war zone because of you. Days after the attempted murder of Donald Trump, you called him and his supporters fascists. You have overseen some of the most radical youth trans surgery laws in the country. You have the most radical abortion laws in the country, zero limits. On immigration, you famously said you wanted to provide a ladder so that invaders could come over the wall. You oversaw the worst fraud of the COVID era, the Feed Our Future case. I don't know anything about that. I guess I'll have to get up to speed.
Yeah, there was some fraud where Minnesota got ripped off.
During COVID, you approved $500 million in hero pay, only for 40% of that money to go to people who were literally deceased. In the House, you were Pelosi's sidekick and did whatever the Democrats demanded. Of everything he said so far, only BLM and the Pelosi sidekick right now are like clicking for me. The Pelosi sidekick thing is interesting, just because, I mean, she's not exactly the most beloved figure, and that's part of the way that they could help. Help energize Republicans, perhaps, against.
They can try. They ran against Pelosi for 20 years.
That's true.
And it never worked.
Well, it worked in 2010. Let's be honest. It worked in 2010. It was a while ago.
I don't know if that was Pelosi or that was Obama, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm sitting here just trying to grapple with the real, let's think here. I'm sitting here just trying to grapple with why you turned down a Shapiro. I mean, so you brought up the murder case. You brought up the Israel stuff. I mean, but my contention was, I'm curious what you think. I think, let's be honest, I think a lot of the Israel people are willing to cut Kamala a shit ton of slack because they're like, maybe we can bully her or whatever. Who knows what this lady actually believes. I mean, at the same time, Tim Walz, I mean, this guy's signed like BDS legislation. He's pro-Israel. He's as pro-Israel as it gets, right? So do you really think the Israel stuff was the main reason not to pick Shapiro? I understand the whole KKK thing and some of the comments, but I mean, substantively, I don't think there's a lot of daylight here between these two people.
I don't think it was Israel. I think there was some probably vibes element to it that that some of her advisors probably thought, okay, well, if we pick Shapiro, the vibes online are going to be not good for several days. And the vibes, like it's been a purely vibes campaign for 2 weeks. No interviews, no press conferences, no policies. Just vibes.
Wait, no. You can't say that there's been no policies. There's been disavowing of every policy position that she's ever taken, Ryan.
There's been unpolicies.
Yeah. It's been 16 days now this lady's running for president.
I think part of it also maybe is that Shapiro is, yes, he's a governor, but he was just elected.
True.
He's a little young. And so people are looking at Harris.
How old is Tim Walz?
Good question. I bet he's like 64.
He is 60 years old. Okay. Spring chicken, whenever it comes to our current politics. I think Kamala's only 59.
But he was in the House for 10, 15 years.
Right.
And then governor since 2018. Whereas Shapiro is really kind of new to the scene. And so, the knock on from political consultants, a knock on a woman candidate for president is that they say she's not ready to be a commander in chief. Like that's what the political consultants worry about from their focus groups. Is a woman ready to lead?
Yeah.
And if you think back to when 20 years ago, you would attach a general or something to them. Hillary ended up going with Tim Kaine. One of the most boring picks ever. I think people regret going with Tim Kaine there. But I think that Shapiro just didn't have the kind of national gravitas, maybe. I don't know, but Walz is a pretty obscure figure, too.
I'm coming back to ambition. I think that's what it has to be, because Kamala is a deeply insecure person. The only reason she's doing well right now is because she got it handed to her. She didn't actually have to run for it. Every time that she's ever actually been in a real competition, she's crumbled in an interview, in press conference, or not even a contentious one, but on the debate stage, famously. I think it's very possible that Josh Shapiro just coded as way too ambitious. I mean, obviously he wanted to be president and he was going hard for the job. All the Obama impersonation. I think it could have come down to personality where, look, let's be honest too. Walz, anybody who spends their career in politics, you're a weirdo and you're also ambitious.
Yes.
And you also very much want to be president. Yeah. But it also comes, it matters the way that it comes across. And I think with Walz, it's very possible that they just got along well. These are two people. They meshed well. She didn't think that he would try to upstage her. Really, all you could really ask for in a VP is a loyal number two. He's a good attack dog. That's what they want. They also could let him absorb some of the hits, send him out there to do interviews and all these things and protect the top of the ticket, who is a lot more averse to media. So I see some of the wisdom, but really, like, if I zoom out 50,000 feet, this just tells me that their theory of victory, which I have to assume is based on something, is not what I had envisioned for them, the 270 plus one, just hold down the blue wall. They really believe they can be competitive in Arizona and in Georgia. And so this is a historic decision in that it gives us insight to how their theory of victory actually looks, and their map to 270, which is very different than Joe Biden's original map. Yeah,
and Shapiro didn't go on air like Tim Walz did.
That's true. He didn't go on TV a lot.
For it, and he's really good on air. So that was, I think, a blunder on his part. It makes me go back to the opening that they had for an actual open process for president, where you would have like a 5-week period where Harris would make her case online, on cable, having rallies. Walz would make his case. Pritzker, Shapiro, they'd all make their case, and the kind of vibes would then end up picking, who they nominate in Chicago for president.
Yeah,
and I think that's basically what happened here. The vibes were drifted towards Walz's direction. I think in an open 5-week situation like that, Walz could have actually won the nomination. People are like,
how ironic is that?
Yeah.
Is that IRL, if he actually ran in an open thing, he might have won.
Yeah.
Like, that's the craziest part here is that he is probably a far better candidate. I mean, so was Josh Shapiro, let's be honest.
If he would have run against Biden,
he would
instead of Dean Phillips.
Crush him. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Who would have thought that the Minnesota Democrat who would triumph from this whole process was not Dean Phillips and was actually Tim Walz?
Last point, we've talked about this with Emily on Counterpoints. Minnesota and Iowa used to both be swing states. Minnesota slightly becomes blue, and Iowa slightly becomes red. Iowa's rammed through enormous amounts of right-wing legislation. Minnesota rammed through enormous amounts of left-wing legislation. So there might not be a governor other than, say, Pritzker in the entire country with as solid a progressive legislative record as Walz, from materials, class, social, labor stuff, all the way.
Isn't the Democratic Party there called like the
Democratic Farm Labor Party?
Farm Labor, yeah, that's right.
DFL.
I mean, that's a good name, right?
Yeah.
That's one of those where
that's their old populist group.
Yeah, that's right. We also, interesting analysis here. It says if the Obama folks had anything to do with this, and they probably did, a big factor would have been picking a running-mate, ostensibly with limited personal horizons, who covers obvious weaknesses and will stick to a defined role, aka what Joe Biden did.
And they're crazy. He wants to be president.
And I think they're really, I mean, look, I think he definitely wants to be president, but maybe he just didn't. Maybe he just came across a lot less threatening.
Because urban Democrats, like cosmopolitan Democrats, are fooled by the all shucks thing.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, guys, all shucks.
Right. You and I have been in Washington long enough to have met the real all shucks people when the cameras are off and be like, oh man, you're just like everybody else. But most people don't. They don't pay attention to as much of this, and I don't blame them. They should be living their lives doing something else. So I guess the thing that we can zoom out and say a couple of things. Number one, my big one, Kamala theory of victory, very different than how I originally envisioned it. And that's very interesting to me because maybe they have some data points. You know, everyone's saying that this is very online. I don't know. It's possible, but I think these people really want to win. I mean, that's actually what I have taken away from the last couple of weeks. I'm like, oh, these people are playing to win.
They're going to win on vibes, and maybe Harris can dodge doing any interviews.
I think she can.
Forever. The media just putting Walz out totally. Be like, hey, why do you want to hear from me? You got this guy.
That's what I was thinking. Is you put the number 2 out there and you're like, what? Our campaign has been the most transparent in history. And everybody else is like, hey, lady, what do you believe? Do you believe anything, literally at all?
Let's see if she can do an entire 8 years.
Oh, let's not forget this, Ryan. We don't even have a debate right now on the schedule. Trump is like, I'll be at the Fox News debate. Kamala says she'll be at the ABC debate. Are we even going to get a single one? Yeah, send Tim Walz to go debate. Hopefully we'll get a J.D. Vance versus Tim Walz debate. I would enjoy seeing that, actually.
They might fight.
The guy who coined weird versus the person who allegedly is weird. My own bias aside, I'd like to see JD clean his clock, but we'll see. What else can we think about? Josh Shapiro, it was his to lose. He basically lost it. Mark Kelly, yeah, what a disaster too for him. I mean, look, all these people will be loyal. This is a gamble. I do think it is a gamble. She didn't pick the quote-unquote safe choice. A lot of the right-wing reaction is that this was a bad pick. Only time will tell. There's just no way to say immediately in the moment. It could be brilliant, honestly. It could cement that theory of victory for where she goes. I am telling Republicans, though, do not underestimate these people, because I just think every choice that they have made in the last 16 days, from not agreeing to interviews, to disavowing everything, to running basically on nothing except I'm not Trump and I'm not Joe Biden. I hate to say that it is a very viable path to 270.
The polls kept saying generic Democrat could beat Trump,
and they went
and found generic Democrat.
Yeah, that's true. And so anyway, I think it would also. I mean, let's not whitewash this. The media is on these people's side. You know, the media doesn't even care. Yeah. They don't even. They're like, oh, interview? She don't need to do that. You know, that's fine. And so they're going to make Tim Walz the next Jesus Christ. You know, and it's Republicans. They'll scream about it, but that's not how it works, guys. You actually have to really run something. You need to see a lot more discipline, I think, too, from Trump. You know. Yeah.
Good luck
what did I just talk about here, Ryan? That their theory of victory could be different? Well, maybe attacking Brian Kemp in the middle of that new theory of victory, maybe not such a good idea, huh? Not necessarily the one I want to be running on, whenever I see such a massive change
must have got some Georgia
in the race.
Internal polls.
I am seeing a report here that Tim Walz will be at that rally in Philadelphia. Man, that sucks to be Josh Shapiro. To have your rival anointed in your city, whew, that's rough. I'm sure that he'll get some... You have some,
also, if Kamala and Walz lose, Shapiro's well positioned.
That's a great point. Yeah, if you are Josh, now you are the number one out of this whole process. Yeah, and Whitmer too. Although she's kind of kept a low profile recently. I guess it'll be a battle between the two of them. So anyway, that's our snap interesting analysis. I'm sure you guys will have a show tomorrow, so you can break down everything and kind of tell us about maybe Tim Walz's speech, etc. But let's get to the rest of the show that we were recording previously before this news broke. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show, ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.